Hello, everyone. This is Alyssa Klein. I am the Vocational Rehabilitation Services Transition and Pre-Employment Transition Specialist. Welcome. This webinar was set up in response to feedback from you, our provider community, and our partners in the provision of pre-employment transition services. We acknowledge that pre-ETS is still a new concept for all of us, and that while at first blush it may seem to be a simple concept because, well, there's just 5 activities we need to have available to students with disabilities, but it's actually quite complex. And first, we know there are many different stakeholders involved. We've got students, parents, schools, VR counselors, VR pre-ETS reps, providers, employers, counties, and more. Second, Congress divides the student population between students eligible for VR and students who are potentially eligible, and there are different requirements in serving these 2 distinct populations. Third, services can be provided both individually to students or in group settings, which inherently requires very different skill sets, materials, billing structure, etc. And then speaking of billing, we've also had to come up with a whole new rate structure based on RSA requirements. So we know that that rate structure can be cumbersome and confusing. And then just to make things even more interesting, along comes COVID-19, which we're all currently collectively living in right now. So I say all of that not so much to dwell on the negative, but to acknowledge what we have all, again, collectively been trying to manage together. I want you to know that VRS is 100% committed to doing what we can to make pre-ETS provision work for everybody, and as well as to support all of you so that the system can work in a way that benefits everyone involved. So the goal for today is to share some resources, our plans for supporting all of you going forward, and allow for some time for you to share and ask some questions. So I just introduced myself and Ann Macklett, who has done so much work to help support me and support all of us with learning and development, introduced herself. We also have Kim Babine on the line. Kim, do you want to say a few words?
Yes, good morning, everybody. Yeah, good morning. I'm Kim Babine, Director of Community Partnerships with BRS, and I'm very grateful to Alyssa and Ann and others who have been working to put this together, Sarah Sundin and Ann Paulson and Marianne's help. We know that there's lots of information even, before COVID that we wanted to get out to you and continue getting out to you. So this is along those lines. And then, of course, just be in conversation as we figure out the new world here. I do want to mention that as we go through it, I know there are some things that we require, whether it's billing or invoicing or how we had to structure group services and rates. And I just want to be clear up front that we know that some of the things that are set up are cumbersome and take a lot of your time and are hard to do, and they're hard on our staff as well. For every authorization that you get for a group, we have staff who are putting those in and receiving those invoices. It is not what we would have chosen. Our federal funder, the Rehabilitation Services Administration, has really put us in a box, so to speak, in terms of what we are required to do for reporting and for how we tie the funding to individual students. So we would love it to be simpler, and we will continue pushing back on our federal funder to let them know how cumbersome this is. And just know that if we can change it, we will, and at this point we can't. But we are committed to giving you as much information as we can and smoothing the edges around the process as much as we can. So look forward to the conversation here and know that it will continue. This is just one of many things that we're going to be doing. So good morning. Thank you.
Thanks, Kim. And we also have on the line Ann Paulson, our VRS contract specialist. Ann, do you want to say hello to everybody?
Good morning. This is Ann Paulson. Thank you, everyone, for attending. I am looking forward to being available for any assistance or questions or concerns, and honestly learning and listening from our partners as well. And I'm available as needed and look forward to this webinar.
Thanks, Ann. Okay. So here's our agenda for today. I'm going to start with a short review of pre-employment transition services. I know many of you are already familiar with pre-ETS, but just to make sure we're all on the same page and remind us of a few important items related to pre-ETS. Also going to review a few items related to referrals from VR to our professional and technical contracted providers. Going to go through some new pre-ETS resources for our providers, talk about other supports we have planned for our providers, talk a little bit about this time of providing services remotely, and then have time for a question and answer period. So let's dig in here. Just a few reminders about what pre-employment transition services are. And this is a slide we've had in every presentation, but this all began in July of 2014 with the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act, or WIOA, and which amends our Rehabilitation Act of 1973. And we've got two primary changes that impact youth with disabilities, and what we're going to be talking about obviously today is pre-employment transition services. And within WIOA, there's a funding requirement that all VR programs across the country are required to spend 15% of their federal funds on pre-employment transition services annually. So in Minnesota, for this federal fiscal year, that's about $6.8 million. And here are the 5 broad categories of pre-employment transition services. They call them the 5 required services, which are job exploration counseling, work-based learning experiences, post-secondary education counseling, workplace readiness training, and instruction in self-advocacy. And Congress also calls out that we need to have pre-employment transition services available to these 2 populations of students. So there are those that are eligible for VR. So they've applied for VR and they've been determined eligible for our traditional VR services. And VRS counselors are the staff that serve those students, and they include the needed pre-employment transition services as part of the employment plan. And then there are the potentially eligible students, which is this whole new concept for all of us. And these are students that have a documented disability, are in an education program, and are between the ages of 14 through 21. Those are the 3 requirements for being able to access pre-ETS services. And of course, last summer, we hired on 23 new staff, which their title is pre-ETS Rehabilitation Representative, or pre-ETS representatives for short. And they coordinate those needed pre-ETS services across the state. So we have 1 pre-ETS representative on each one of our VR teams. And availability is an important piece of all of this. These pre-ETS are provided in collaboration with secondary schools. That's a requirement in WIOA. And that they must be made available statewide to all students with disabilities. Again, regardless of whether the student has applied or been determined eligible for VR, and that any student with a disability is considered to be potentially eligible for pre-ETS. And that whole thing around required, these are some clarifications here. So we're only required to have them available statewide to those that need these services. We're not required to provide them to every student with a disability. There's like 47,000 students that we know of that have disabilities between ages 14 and 21. we simply could never be able to provide, at least at this funding level, services to all those students. So we need to look at those students that need these services. And then they're provided solely, and that's what I just said, on the basis of the student's need for the service. So that's it in terms of some just basic things, reminders for all of us related to pre-ETS. And this next section here, I'll get into pre-ETS referrals to our PT contracted providers. So because we have two populations of students that we're serving now, we also have two referral forms, which are linked on the slides here today. We have students who are eligible for VR, and we use our regular VRS referral form. It's our universal referral form that we already were using for other VR participants and referring them to our providers. So it's the same process in referring a student that is eligible. But then for those that are potentially eligible, we have a separate referral form, the pre-ETS referral for potentially eligible students. And the reason we have two forms is, first of all, eligible students may receive VR services and pre-ETS at the same time. Potentially eligible students can only receive the 5 required pre-employment transition services. Secondly, the information that we collect from each population is different. And in past presentations, we went through that whole list of what we collect for our students who are potentially eligible, which is much less than what we collect on students who are eligible. And group services, just some reminders related to that. So when we are referring students, or you're going to be providing services to students and groups, we're able to pay you or reimburse you based on the number of students who were referred by VRS, who had an authorization, and who attended that group service. So those students that, in order for us to reimburse you, the students referred must be enrolled with VRS as either eligible or potentially eligible. And unfortunately, we're not able to pay for those that were referred but didn't attend. And also for you to know that when we're referring students for a group service, our staff are always authorizing at the individual rates or the highest amount. And then upon completion of the class, we adjust the encumbrance based on the number of students who were referred by VRS and who actually attended that group service. So it's based on your invoice to us. And then another reminder is that your agency must keep a class list which documents which student actually attended, and this is for monitoring purposes. If your agency allowed additional students to attend, you'll want to make sure you indicate which students were actually referred by VRS. Do not send this list to us. We're trying to manage, information about students, thinking about data privacy, et cetera. So don't send us that list. It's expected that you're keeping those class lists for monitoring purposes only. And this is one that we've had a lot of questions about, the first meeting. So RSA does not allow for an intake to be funded for pre-ETS services. Now, I'm going to just say there's a caveat to this. Later on, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about some flexibilities that recently came out from RSA. But at this point, until we send out more information, we're not allowed to pay for an intake for pre-ETS services, and we never will when it comes to students who are potentially eligible. So instead of an intake, an extra 1 to 2 hours can be authorized for that first meeting for any of the pre-ETS services. And then keep in mind that if a student is being referred for more than one pre-ETS service, that first meeting, the time must be split by the number of pre-ETS that will be provided. And that's going to make more sense when I pull up some reports later on today. Wally World is one of the students that I'll be showing you, and you'll see how we split the invoice by two of the pre-ETs that are going to be provided. And at that first meeting, if a student is being referred for work experience services to help that student in finding an intermediate job, which it's a work experience, but essentially it's a job because an employer is going to hire them on and pay their wage, that's the only time that the placement plan needs to be completed. So your agency needs to take the lead in ensuring that it does get completed. It lists the roles and responsibilities of the job seeker, in this case the student, the placement professional, and the VRS counselor or pre-ETS representative. Everybody signs it, and everyone should get a copy of that. So that's just a reminder that we want to make sure that that placement plan gets completed. So that's it from what I have for just some reminders. And you just stop me if there's any questions as we're going. Again, we'll have a Q&A session later, but if there's anything I need to clarify along the way, let me know, Anne, because it's hard for me to watch the chat and present at the same time.
I will do that.
All right. Thanks, Anne. So now let's get into the good stuff here. So we've got some new resources that we put together for our providers. And all of you hopefully received the link to the new web page that we have on our DEED website. And I'm just going to pull that up real quick here. So if I'm going about it not through the link, but we have a pre-employment transition services section, and we have this page that says pre-ETS resources for PT contracted providers. So today's webinar, that's where you can get the PowerPoint. We'll also, put the recording once it's available. It usually takes about a week to get that available, but we will post that here for all of you. And then we have this tab here that has some resources, and we're going to review these resources today. And then contact info has my contact info here if you need to get in touch with me if you have any questions related to pre-ETS. So let's review the Minnesota pre-ETS toolkit first. I'm going to go back here. Under resources, we have the pre-ETS toolkit linked right here. And I won't go through the whole thing too in-depth today, but just wanted to call out that we have a table of contents, and it's pretty easy to scroll through. If there's something in particular you're looking for, like you want to skip down to counseling on post-secondary education, you can click Control and then Enter, and then it will take you right to that section within the toolkit. The toolkit is organized by, first of all, it's just the 5 required pre-employment transition services. And we have within each one, we'll start here with job exploration counseling. We have our Minnesota VRS definition of job exploration counseling. We list the common results from participation in job exploration counseling or in the other pre-ETS services, which really allows for knowing what kind of, it's an outcome basically from the student participating in that pre-employment transition services. And so our staff, our pre-ETS representatives, when they're referring a student, they're acknowledging which of the outcomes that they want the student to be working on when they are working with you. And then we have a list of activities that can be completed in individual or group settings. And within the list, we have links to different lesson plans or resources. And then at the bottom, we have just a list of other resources related to that pre-employment transition service. So that's how the whole guide is set up. If you scroll to the end, sorry if I'm giving you a little bit of a headache here. If you scroll to the end, we have an appendix, Appendix A, where we've listed the top 25 pre-ETS resources. I know I've heard from a number of people where they've asked for curriculum ideas, and so we just thought it'd be easy to list out kind of some top ideas for you related to curriculum, et cetera. Things are not listed in any particular order, and all things are free unless it's indicated by an asterisk. So for instance, I'll start with this first one here, Explore Work. So again, you can click, it'll take you right to the page. Explore Work is an online curriculum or a site for students that they can go in and work independently. It was created by our National Technical Assistance provider, WinTAC, and it's all organized around the 5 pre-employment transition services. And students can set up their own profile in here, and they can have emails sent out to either their VR counselor or a provider to notify, say it was the VR counselor, it can notify you when they've completed different activities in here. So anyway, that's one resource I definitely recommend that you look into. And so we have other curriculum ideas here. We have other planning tools and resources. A lot of these things are Minnesota resources. And then the top online career information sites. MCIS, I'm going to click on that one right now for you. 80% of our high schools have a subscription to the Minnesota Career Information System. And so because a lot of the schools are using that, and because a lot of students have portfolios saved in MCIS, all of our VR staff have access to this site. And one thing I wanted to show you in here, and we're going to talk about access for our providers if you don't already have access to MCIS. We'll talk about that in a little bit. But one thing I really wanted to call out for you in here, you know, it's a tool for students to explore occupations, explore different education opportunities. They can save things in their portfolio. And then there's a lot of tools for those of us who are supporting students. And if you go to the bottom of any of their pages in MCIS, you'll see where it says MCIS resources and curriculum. So they have a whole host of different lesson plans in here related to MCIS. So let's say you are working with them on, they have a resume creator in here. You can click on that. You just click sort, and up comes a whole bunch of different activities that you can do with students. So you can click on view the activity, and it tells you how long it takes to go through. Like this activity takes 150 minutes across 3 days. They're not all that long. A lot of them are one class period, but it takes you through step by step how to deliver this lesson plan. And then if you go towards the bottom of the page, so it goes through day 1, day 2, day 3, they have all the materials that you need. So they have a PowerPoint and different handouts for the students, et cetera. So I just want you to be aware that there's a lot of cool things within MCIS too. I'm going to go back to the toolkit. We're going to be talking about a few other sites that we have listed on here. eTrack is a platform supported by one of our partners out there, Midwest Special Services. We'll talk about that, as well as Virtual Job Shadow. But then there's all these other different websites that you can utilize. We also have in Appendix B some examples of classroom or group services, as well as individual or one-on-one services. So just to give you some ideas on how you could be providing these services. So that's the pre-ETS toolkit. at the bottom, what I didn't show you is it has the date that it was updated, so it says March of 2020. If you find that there are some resources that you are utilizing that aren't in the toolkit, let me know. I can keep updating this toolkit, and then I'll update the date within the toolkit so you'll know that, you know, if it's been updated. And certainly if there's any questions or concerns with that, let me know. Another request that we've had from providers is on reporting and invoicing. You know, can we have some samples? Can we help guide all of you related to pre-ETS and reporting and invoicing? Because I know that there's some different challenges when it comes to pre-ETS. The first thing I want to say related to reports, and I'm going to be pulling some up here. When you think of reports, you need to have a report that goes along with each invoice. And a report is basically a document that tells the story behind the invoice. It details what occurred with each student encounter and how much time you are billing with each encounter. Additionally, if more than one pre-ETS service has been authorized, it's important to distinguish which pre-ETS service has been provided during each encounter and for how much time. So what I'm going to do here, I'm going to start with Wally World. Wally received individualized one-on-one services. The services were job exploration counseling and post-secondary education services. So I'm going to go back to our new web page. And we have here sample reports. And here we have Wally World. So I was just saying that it's important to distinguish which of the services have been provided. So first of all, you'll see at the top of all of our sample reports, we have some basic information. We make it clear, you know, obviously who the student is, the dates of service, which match the authorization dates, and then a summary of which pre-employment transition services were provided. That they, in this case, it was one-on-one. If it was a group service, you'd want to indicate as such. And then how much total. In this case, we're giving a report for a month of services. So how many total hours were provided to that student within each of those pre-employment transition services. Then we list the authorization number. So in this case, first of all, and I'm not going to read all of this in depth, don't worry, but I'll just give you, again, a high-level overview. With Wally, it started with on February 2nd, the first meeting was held. And because Wally is going to be receiving both job exploration counseling and post-secondary education counseling, the time was split in that first meeting because that first meeting was about getting the pre-ETS going. So it was 30 minutes of that job exploration counseling and 30 minutes of post-secondary education counseling. And then the second date was on February 9th. On this meeting, time with that student with Wally, there were 2 hours of pre-ETS job exploration counseling provided. We had a summary of what occurred. And then we also included in here student feedback because it's, you know, pre-ETS really are meant to be very person-centered or student-centered, and getting that student feedback is really nice to have, you know, what they experienced that day and what they're thinking about, and so on and so forth. So we go through that whole month and it outlined what happened on each day, how much time it took, and then at the end, some next steps. So I'll pull up now Wally's invoice that goes along with that report. So some things to note about invoices, some things that are really important that you need to include. First of all would be at the top, make sure you have your remit to contact information. So here's the Pathway to Success was the provider. There is their address and phone number. Making sure that you always have a unique invoice number on the invoice. And then, of course, you'll want to have the authorization number, the dates of the service, a description of the service, the number of units that are being billed for each day, the unit rate, and then the total amount for each line item. So on here, again, on that first meeting, we have it split here because it was 1 hour, but half of that time was pre-ETS job exploration counseling, and half of that time was pre-ETS post-secondary education counseling. So, and then we have each day, other day that services were provided, which services and how much time, and how much is being billed for each day with the total invoice at the bottom. I'm going to show, in contrast, Paul Sunflower received group services. And so in this case, we indicate at the top of the bill, or excuse me, of the report, the total group hours that were billed. And then for each date of service, the amount of time that was spent providing the group service and which service that was. And then to look at the invoice for that group service, you'll see, so the first date on May 13th, there were 6 students in the class. So we had group pre-ETS job seeking skills training was provided for 1.25 hours. If you look at the rate schedule that we have for pre-ETS, for 6 students in the class, it would be $18 an hour. On the second day of class, there were 8 students. Again, it was 1.25 hours, but for 8 students being in the class, it's $15 an hour per student. So we have that. And then the third line item is there were 7 and how you would bill for that with the total invoice at the bottom. The other 2 examples we have are related to work experience services. Amaya Jackson is receiving work experience services to look for a job where an employer is going to hire her on and pay her wages. And so we use a different sort of report template here, but it still gets at the same information. And you'll see in the first meeting here what occurred and that a placement plan was completed. And for Amaya, we go through the whole process. It just so happened it all took place in 1 month, which wouldn't that be nice if it always happened that way? But we took you through the whole process where the provider helped her with looking for jobs, completing applications. She had an interview at Walmart. She ended up getting the job at Walmart. And then that provider helped her. We talk about what can be authorized for with work experience services. It can be the first meeting. It can be helping to orient that student to the job or the work experience. It can be to follow up with that student. And of course, I missed step 2, which is helping them to obtain that experience. So in this case, the provider helped her with completing an online background check and drug screen paperwork. This provider went with her on her first day when she had her orientation, introduced themselves and helped her just get, again, oriented to this new location where she's going to be working, and then followed up with the student and the employer. we included student and employer feedback on this report as well.
Alyssa, I do have a couple of questions. I don't know if now is the right time to do it, but a couple of questions have come
Okay.
through that.
How about, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, you can finish that up. I just want to make sure to ask when it's time.
How about I just review this invoice and, for Amaya real quick? And it's pretty straightforward. So she had one-on-one service. It was only one pre-ET service that was authorized for, which is work experience services for the month of November of 2019. So it's a pretty straightforward invoice for her. So go ahead with the questions.
Okay, so the first one from Chelsea, if a pre-ET student is authorized for all 5 pre-ETs, just in case they need them, CRPs will have to divide the first meeting into all 5 services, correct? Or should we ask counselors to narrow down which services they think the student may start with instead of dividing 5 meetings times by 5? Or instead of dividing first meeting time by 5?
Yeah, to make it easy, yes, I would definitely, talk about paring it down for that first meeting if possible. I know that's a pain, so, you could say we're going to start with these 2 services right now, and that's what we discussed today. Absolutely.
Perfect. And then the other one is from Jackie. Are there any rules on billing increments? We've always received invoices with hour, 3/4, 1/2, or 1/4 of an hour increments. Is 1/4 the smallest increment we should be receiving from our vendors? Anything less than that might become, difficult to calculate. Mm-hmm.
Yes, 1/4 hour, 0.25 is the smallest increment that a provider should go on billing.
And then I believe I have one more. Maybe 2 more. Can the report that accompanies the invoice be general information for groups? For example, for Paul Sunflower's report, would that look the same as Wally World's if they attended the same group experience?
Yes. So I'm going to pull back up the report for Paul because that is exactly how that one was written. So you'll see on May 13th, it says, today was the first day of providing job-seeking skills training in Miss Apple's resource room. And today's focus was on resumes. And it just goes through what was reviewed in that class session. It's very general. And what I also included here is that at the end of class, the students reflected on this experience in their MCIS personal learning plan. So this is just one way that you could have students be reflecting or recording information. As I mentioned earlier, like MCIS allows for students to have a portfolio where they can reflect on different things that they work on. So in here, the student, you can get at more kind of their own individualized experience by looking at their MCIS personal learning plan. But this report could have been the same report for every student that was in that class. That's very general, doesn't get into specific information about that student.
Okay, taking a couple more. So there's one general kind of question from Margie asking, any tips on how people track information for invoicing? So maybe, have you seen some tricks that people have done or tips on how they've tracked things for invoicing?
I have not. I don't have some really great tools or tips right now. Maybe when we get into the sharing, for those of you that have come up with some processes for tracking, maybe you can share if you have something. or you can send them my way. These are the sort of things we would like to have available. If you've come up with a spreadsheet or something that you'd be willing to share, those are the things that would be really awesome to have, we can have on our resources page. So for those of you that do use Workforce One, we're working on a way for tracking in there, but that's only a very small percentage of providers that have access to Workforce One at this time. So yeah, I don't have anything else to share right now, but would love to hear from all of you.
Great, and we can kind of remember to kind of bring that up at the point of sharing. And then I'll just ask, I think, maybe one more. NemoJet created fillable invoices that could easily fit onto one page, meaning we are not providing the summary of services on the invoice, only in the corresponding case note. Is that okay?
Right. So the invoice, I'm going to pull up again. Let's pull up Wally World's invoice. It doesn't have any detail about what was provided other than just a basic description of what the service was. So, you know, on February 9th, Create's job exploration was provided for 2 hours. That's all you're getting here. The report is what gives you the story of what actually occurred. I hope that answered it.
Perfect. And then there are 2 others. I'm going to jump to this one first. Can we bill for work experience development if the student is not with the provider?
Yes, and we have a slide on that too. This is another complexity I realize, we all realize, between, for those of you that provide pre-ETS as well as regular VR services. So it's been clarified that you cannot bill for development for site development for regular VR services. However, you can bill for site development for pre-ETS. And that can include phone calls to employers or work that you are doing on behalf of the student to develop a work experience site.
Great, and like they keep coming in, so these are related. So, and then can providers use the sample invoices reports as templates?
Yes, and you know, Anne, I was thinking you did develop some actual templates based on these, and we didn't put those up. So we can even send those out, but otherwise you can just take these and save them and make your own template. Absolutely.
Yep, we have some fillable forms that we put together that we could save or share out there as well. And then Alyssa was asking if, are we supposed to be generating a report like you are showing here, which is yes, but I'll have you see if you want to expound on.
Me?
Yes, she's just asking, are you supposed to be generating a report like you're showing here? These are just examples that Alyssa is showing. So to give you a chance to see the type of report you could produce.
Right. So for those of you that enter into Workforce One, we've said that you only need to enter, because you're entering your reports into the case notes. So your report can look just like this, only in the case note. And so you just need to make sure you have a report in the case notes every time you invoice us. So again, it tells the story of the invoice. Should I move on to our last example, or do you have?
Yeah, the last thing I think I'm going to just reference and that we can address later, Anna's asking about what are the follow-up requirements for services and check-ins, aside from communication updates and those types of things, but I think that might be further in, so.
Yeah, I'm not sure if we have a lot of detail in the PowerPoint on that. Really, the follow-up requirements really should be discussed between the VR staff person, whether it's the counselor or pre-ETS rep that referred the student, and then from you as our provider to talk about, you know, the follow-up, because it can be individualized based on that student need. So, just be discussing, and you'll probably inherently know what makes the most sense for following up with a student. So sometimes you might help a student gain a work experience and the employer doesn't even know that you were engaged. And so it's a matter of following up with that student only. And, at whatever interval makes the most sense. So it's just something that you'll want to communicate together based on that student's needs. We don't have any particular requirements or parameters around that. Should I move on?
Yes, and I will capture some of the other questions that people have related to development. We'll be following up through the PowerPoint on some of those questions. So.
Okay, we'll make sure we get them answered. So our last example is Scarlett Pine. She also received work experience services, but this is for a short-term work experience. We've said that a good benchmark for a short-term work experience would be 120 hours. It's not a requirement that it has to be 120 hours. It could certainly be less. It can also be more. It's really something that another piece that would be discussed between the members of the team. What makes the most sense for that student? In this case, there was a meeting with Scarlett and the PREETS representative and the provider. The student wanted to have an experience at a daycare, and it just so happened that this provider had a relationship with a daycare center. And it was discussed that the provider would be paying the wages for the student during the work experience. So the report just details what occurred, to get it set up, to help that student get oriented to that experience, and the follow-up that occurred. And then what we also included here is student-employer feedback. This is just an example. You don't have to use this particular rating scale, but I included an example where at the end of the month, the provider asked both the supervisor and the student to complete a rating scale on how the student did in each of these particular areas related to the work experience. And then a commentary section, there was a meeting to discuss how the student was doing. And again, only the supervisor and the student commented and reported on how it was going. And then in this case, because the provider is paying the student a wage, there was a summary of that student's timesheet. It's indicated on this report that the supervisor was signing off on the student's timesheet, so we know that it's legitimate. And so this just summarized how many hours in that week, or in that month, excuse me, that the student worked. So then if we go to Scarlett's invoice, there are two lines here. So the provider had a line to bill us for the work experience services. So there were 8 hours of service provided in that month. And then there was a line for the wages. So we indicated in the report that at that daycare, the starting wage for an entry-level employee at the daycare is $10.50 an hour. So that's what she was paid, plus 25% administrative costs, which equaled $13.13 an hour. On the report, it indicated she worked 70 hours. So 13 times 70 is $9.19, and then the total invoice is at the bottom. So, please, we can answer more questions today. Feel free to contact me if there's any questions going forward. If you think it would be helpful to have other examples of reports and invoices, please let me know. We can certainly create others as well. So this was one of the questions, but just some things to note. First of all, again, you can bill for phone calls and emails with employers, as well as the student and those that support the student related to arranging for or providing PREETS services. We also just got this clarification that you also can bill, this is new probably for all of you out there, including our VR staff, for your time to prepare for a pre-ed session. So if you know that you're going to be providing a group service, you can be billing for your time to prepare for that group session. Of course, there needs to be an authorization in place, authorizations for that group ahead of time. So you'll also want to communicate what kind of prep needs you have for each session with the VRS staff person so that there's enough authorized for you to do that. And again, only the student and employer report on how a work experience is going. And that's a requirement from RSA. I see there is a question, can you bill for one-on-one prep time as well? Yes, you can. Are there any other questions, Anne, that I missed?
Yeah, someone also asked, Taylor asked about just, can we open up access to Workforce One for other pre-ETS providers? So maybe you just want to clarify that too.
Yeah, so how this has worked up to now is, as many of you may know, we first dipped our toe into the waters of providing pre-ETS to potentially eligible students by a request for proposals and a grant process. So we, for 2 years, had 12 grantees that provided pre-ETS to potentially eligible students. And those grantees had access to Workforce One. They were managing their caseloads in there. When those grants ended, we continued their access into Workforce One as a sort of pilot project because those are the only providers other than our independent living centers that have access to Workforce One at this time. So they are still utilizing Workforce One to enter their reports. I know there is a hope in the future that all of our providers could have access. That isn't possible at this time. I know Kim Babine is looking into the ins and outs of that, and I don't know, Kim, if there's anything else you want to say right now. I just know that at this time we're not ready for that, but I know there is that desire in the future.
Hi there. Thanks, Alyssa. This is Kim Babine, and yes, that is something that we are moving towards and trying out. So there's some small and large builds that we need to do in the Workforce One system to allow that to be possible. We're still not exactly sure, how to make all the things on our wish list happen. We're working with the developers and, IT folks on the Workforce One side to make that happen. And so it is not imminent. And of course, everything got turned upside down in the last couple of weeks. So it is definitely not highest priority for our IT folks right now. So in the future, yes, that is our hope, and we're working towards it.
Thank you. We know it would be ideal for everyone, especially when you don't have to have emails and whatnot going around with student information. But more to come on that. All right, so other support for providers that we want to communicate with you today. First of all, we have an opportunity for all of you, which we think is probably timely right now while many of us are working from home and needing to provide services remotely. We are able to pay for a 1-year website subscription for our providers in order to provide pre-ETS to students with disabilities. At this time, the 3 websites that we have available that we are able to pay for include MCIS, the Minnesota Career Information System, which I had pulled up earlier. So if you don't have access to MCIS at this time and would be interested in that, that's a possibility. E-Track, I mentioned that earlier, again, supported by Midwest Special Services. All of these sites are also linked here so you can get more information. And I'll say a little bit more about these in a minute. And then Virtual Job Shadow is another website that we have access for you if you're interested. We will be providing demos of these sites. First of all, eTrack. We're working with Taylor at Midwest Special Services to offer a demo on Tuesday, April 7th at 11 a.m. And then we will also have a demo of Virtual Job Shadow on April 8th at 2 p.m. And we will be sending out an announcement to all of you through our Gov delivery system so that you know you have the links to access these demos. And then training. So I don't have a demo set up for MCIS because in April they're going to be offering some webinar trainings. And so I will announce those trainings once they are set up. We can set up a training on Virtual Job Shadow, which we will announce later. And then with eTrack, Taylor felt that, you know, you might get all you need through the demo and just by getting into the site, but if there were some training needs and we needed to offer something virtually, we can still do that as well. So you'll just need to let us know if there's some training needs that you have after getting access to the site and going through the demo. So if you're interested in one or all three or two, whatever it is of those websites, we set up a SurveyMonkey, and here's the link. You just go into the link and it asks you what we need to know, and then we'll get you the access to those websites. Please have this survey completed by Friday, April 17th. I will note that this link is for providers only. We are providing access to these sites to our VRS staff, but we have a different survey link that I sent out yesterday. Another thing that will be coming soon is we're going to be recording pre-ETS mini training modules for providers so that you can access these things online and have just short segments related to different aspects of pre-ETS. We had hoped to have that done in March, but then on February 27th, RSA came out with some flexibilities related to pre-ETS and what we can pay for related to pre-ETS. Bottom line, it allows for VRS to use our pre-ETS funds for costs associated with providing certain regular VR services. And this only applies to students eligible for VR, not students who are potentially eligible. We're still working through policy and guidance related to that internally within VRS. And then we're going to have to set up some new systems with our types and titles system for authorizing, and that's not ready yet. So we're working on that. Once it is completed, we will be getting these training modules in place, and we will be announcing to all of you once they are in place. So just know that that's coming. We also have a hope. We know that these meetings might need to be changed, but of gathering everybody regionally between VRS and our professional technical providers to just have the conversations about what the needs are from the VRS side and for our providers to talk about what they currently have available and, you know, for everyone to learn from each other and talk about, you know, how we can all move forward together as a community. So these are dates that we have set at this point. You will see that we have 2 metro sessions, and then for the south and the north, we will have a in-person location, and then we'll have some virtual sites. So more to come on that. This is, again, what we have in place right now. We're going to kind of wait and see how things go with the pandemic. If we need to change these, we will let you know. We also hope to have more Q&A webinars like we're holding today. And our plan, if we do hold these meetings in April and May, would be to do another round of regional meetings possibly in August before the school year. But again, all of this kind of we'll have to wait and see how this all plays out with the pandemic, unfortunately. I also want you to be aware that we are partnering with the Minnesota Rehabilitation Association, or MRA. First of all, with the Transition Division, they are working on a day training on July 16th with Denise Bissonette. If you're familiar with Denise, she's a national speaker. She talks a lot about job development, and we'll be putting it in the perspective of pre-ETS and working with high school students. So more to come on that. We're also partnering with the MRA board on including some pre-ETS related sessions at the October 21st through 23rd MRA conference, which will be held at Rutgers and Bay Lake. There will be a pre-ETS pre-conference as well as pre-ETS sessions throughout the conference. So lastly, just wanted to again call out, we're in this really difficult and interesting time right now of having to be creative and provide pre-ETS remotely. Just know that we're really open to creative ideas right now. I guess that's the benefit right now, is that we can put our creative hats on and try to think of new ways of having services available. Know that, VRS staff can authorize for services to be provided either over the phone or online, and that they can be one-on-one or group services. I have a list of some possible platforms that you could look into if you're not sure of what platform you'd want to use. We haven't tested all these out. These were just some that have come my way in the past week or so. So these are just some things you could look into. I'm just curious if anyone has some ideas or wants to share through the chat section, some things that you are doing right now or ways you're providing pre-ETS remotely at this time.
So yes, just a reminder, as Alyssa asked, for that, it'd be great if when you do the chat, you could put everyone or all participants or attendees in the two, and then we can all see what you're sharing.
And how about I do this? Would love to hear your ideas for some different things you're doing right now or questions that you have related to providing pre-ETS remotely. But really this time in our webinar today is really for Q&A, to ask questions that maybe you haven't asked yet. So if you have questions or you have some things you'd like to share, please, you can put any of that into the chat box. I know one question here from Nancy was, will there be an upcoming opportunity to amend contracts to add pre-ETS? I'll let Kim Babine answer that one.
That is a great question. The answer, this is Kim Babine, the answer to will there be an upcoming opportunity to amend the contracts to add pre-ETS or change pre-ETS on your contract is yes. That has been turned up, our schedule of when we were planning on doing that this spring here turned upside down in the last 2 weeks, and so we need to get a sense as to the capacity of our staff to be able to do that. That's less difficult. Most of our staff are up and running, and including our VRS fiscal folks and our VRS grants admin folks who help move those contracts along. For the most part, we're all up and running, but we need to check on the capacity and how deed fiscal is being pulled in different directions. And then the contracts go through the State Department of Administration, Office of State Procurement. And so we need to check on their capacity to be able to process these, as they're also getting pulled in different directions for emergency reasons. So I know that is a concern, and so we're just giving them a little breathing space as they handled those emergencies and are handling those emergencies, and then we will ask that question as to when we can make that happen.
I know that there'll be some other pieces that we will be talking about too, related to, I know there's been feedback about the administrative percentage that goes along with work experience wages. We've heard that it just does not cover the cost of our providers, and so we are looking at increasing that, so that would be included. So
Correct.
More to come on that. I don't know if there's more you want to say on that, Kim?
Yeah, so we thank you to a couple of providers who have provided me with more detail as to why the 25% administrative cost on top of the work experience wages is not sufficient to cover your costs. If you are in that category, if the 25% is not covering your costs or is providing that service difficult, please contact me. I'm working out the math to see what a reasonable increase in that rate would be in that administrative fee. And so if you have that information, or your folks, your billing folks or financial folks can pull any information together, I'd welcome it. Working on the math for that, and then we would work on that with you all and then amend the contracts when we open it up this spring.
I do see some questions here. Melissa, I know she's one of our our independent living center providers, said that, so she asked, so the notes no longer have to go with the invoice if we enter into Workforce One. No, so for those out there that do have access to Workforce One, the beauty of having that access is that you don't have to send a report separately along with the invoice. So you just enter in the case note into Workforce One, and then you only email the invoice. That reduces the amount of paperwork flying around out there for each student, so that the actual report just goes into Workforce One. You can indicate on the invoice that the report is in Workforce One, although our staff should know, certain providers have that access, but, and then is prep time split between students? Yes. So if you're going to be providing a group service to 10 students, it's just like as if you were billing for that, that service to, that classroom time. So if it takes you an hour to prep for that class, you would split that time. You would use that group rate table to figure out how you would split it between all the students. If that makes sense. Alyssa from NemoJet said that they have developed virtual career exploration worksheets for an interest assessment, personality assessment, and virtual career videos. More to come. So yeah, if you are creating some different resources that others could use, would love for you to send them my way, and we can share them with everyone. So that's fabulous. Elena says that Zoom has a share screen feature and free options, so individuals can see what you're doing on your screen and your end. So I have heard that Zoom has lifted, you can use Zoom free for like 40 minutes, and I heard yesterday that they've lifted that 40 minutes, so you can use Zoom longer than that 40 minutes. I have personally been using Zoom in a lot of meetings the last week and a half. It does seem to work really well. Another question, what best practices are CRPs using to prevent no-shows, no calls, as these are not billable for the face-to-face or mileage if you do not show? We are messaging and sending reminders, but they still are experiencing no-shows. If anyone has some good best practices related to that, yes, please share. I know that that's a problem. It's another item that we get from RSA. They won't allow us to allow you to bill for no-shows, unfortunately. So if you all have some tips out there that have worked, we'd love to hear that. Any best practices to watch the authorization purchase end dates to ensure new authorizations are requested and sent before the end dates? If anyone has any good ideas related to this, you can put them in the chat box or you can send them to me. Taylor says, we have multiple sessions planned to do e-track activities over the phone or online with students later this week. Awesome. Also, I'm not sure I'm able to chat with all. I believe only presenters and panelists. Oh, in the chat here. So that was his question, or his comment. Thank you, Taylor. Andrea, are there any guidelines or suggestions for working with vulnerable populations in video format? I can't say that I have any offhand. Obviously, you know, these are the things we're wading into right now with this time that we're living in right now. If any of you have anything out there, it's another thing to share. Can you explain travel/transportation costs allowed with pre-ETS? That's another really good question. Kim, do you want to take that one, or do you want me to start? Or
Could you start and then I'll jump in?
okay. So first of all, we want you to know that, and Ann Paulson's taking a lead on putting, we're starting a work group within VRS to examine the issue around travel. That's another thing we've heard from many of you is that it's a concern, especially in our rural areas where a provider has to travel a long way to meet with a student. So we're examining that and looking at any changes we can make related to travel, so more to come on that. At this time, you know, there's the travel differential that we have included in the pre-ETS rates. So you're only billing for your time to provide that service or the prep time. But if you're going to be providing the service, you know, and actually what I could do is pull that up real quick here. Oh, give me 1 second. I'm going to pull up the rates. So you can find them on our community partners page. And, oh, where is it, Kim?
So into related resources, this is Kim, and then we're moving some things around here, so sorry about that. So go to professional and technical contracts. This will be redone in the coming days. And then scroll down, and that's where.
Here we have. So we have rate structure for pre-ETS. So I'm going to go, so we have our basic rates if the services are performed within 0 to 25 miles from the provider. And then we have the rates based on if you're traveling further. So if you're traveling 26 to 50 miles, then this is the rate schedule you use, whether it's the individual rate. So if you're meeting one-on-one with a student, it's $90 an hour that you would bill. If you're meeting with more than one student, there's the fee schedule based on how many students showed up for that service, and so on. So it goes to 51 to 75 miles, 76 to 100, and so on. So I hope that answers it. Is there more you want to add, Kim?
I would just say, just to reiterate, we know it's an issue. So we're hearing from you, and we appreciate you can continue letting us know how it's affecting you. We're working on it and trying to solve it and make sure it's very clear for pre-ETS specifically, but then it kind of, especially for folks who have been providing our regular service, making sure that we just kind of lay it all out there so everyone has the information for all the people that we serve, pre-ETS and our general folks. So thank you for the input that we've received so far, and feel free to keep letting me know or Ann Paulson know, and we're working on it.
All right. Eric has a question. If a provider goes out to meet with a teacher/case manager but doesn't see the student, can they bill for the time they met with the teacher? Say if they're discussing when is best to meet with the student or what topics could be covered. Yes, because that's, as long as it's all around arranging for the pre-ETS services, that time can be billed. Alyssa says that the documents they're creating are fillable online in a PDF format, so cool, would love to see them. Any thoughts about making the billing for the groups easier, for example, with fewer levels? Maybe the individual rate and one group rate, for example, reduce the high administrative load. That is some great feedback. That I know we can take. Kim, do you want to say more?
Yeah, so that is very interesting, and thank you for sharing that. So yes, we're open to making it easier. The reason that we set it up with the levels is so that we played around for a long time with the different levels and making sure that you were basically that providers were compensated accordingly as you add students to the group, so that we were able to make sure it worked for both you and us. But if folks are saying, you know what, it's not worth it, we should just simplify it, and sometimes it'll kind of even itself out. Sometimes we'll knocks on the door on WebEx when working from home. Sorry about that. If we're hearing that it's just not worth it and we need to look at simplifying it, and you're saying, we'll win some and lose some in terms of we'll make some money on some and some we might lose a little bit, but it'll all even out. We can definitely look at that. So keep an eye on that. Let me know, let Alyssa and Paulson know, and we'll just hear what more folks have to say about that.
Okay. Kelsey says that GoToMeetings.com is another video chat service, so another resource for all of you. Alyssa says if you're meeting at the school, this is a tip for you, call ahead to make sure the student is in attendance that day. Also, coordination with a teacher who can help remind the student helps so much. Lori, would this be a good time to review the billing for transportation? For example, if someone is being picked up in St. Cloud and transported to Bemidji for a college visit, what is billable in those situations? So, Tim, help me on this one. I don't want to misspeak here. So the student's being picked up in St. Cloud by the provider and being transported to Bemidji for a college visit.
That's the thing. I don't want to answer either because I feel like I'll misspeak. So if you or Ann Paulson feels like you can answer that, if not, we will put a pin in it, so to speak, and be able to answer that once we get the transportation all sorted out.
I think that right now the confusion is, again, we are able to fund for transportation for students who are eligible for VR. We are not at this time able to fund for transportation for students who are potentially eligible. So right now, the fee for services does not include the transportation. So if it's an eligible student, we can authorize on top of the service for transportation for that student. But if they're a potentially eligible student, we're not. So again, this work group that Ann is putting together, we're going to examine this issue a little bit more and look at some creative ways that we can announce to all of you that we can figure out transportation. So I'm going to go with Kim on this too and just say, hold on a little bit here. We're going to get some more clarification for you on this and try to work out ways transportation can be worked out.
Alyssa, I have one, from Eden just mentioning a little bit of the change where that billing for prep time has been maybe even a change for our VRS staff to see. And so is there a maximum amount for prep time allowed is one of the questions.
We have not communicated or set a maximum amount. We expect that it would be reasonable time at this point. So, I mean, if you're prepping for a classroom presentation, for instance, in my mind, it would be 1 to 2 hours to prep, somewhere in there, unless there's just a lot of work that needs to be done. I think, again, that's what, we're trusting our providers to let us know exactly what will take, and that needs to be communicated between the provider and our staff. Over time, we're going to just keep honing in on some of these things. Like if we realize that we need to set more parameters around these things, we will. We don't have them at this point. So right now it's discussing what is reasonable to for that service. Can you simplify what is billable time so we are clear? That would be helpful. So I'm going to go back to the presentation here. So what is billable time? So basically your time in arranging for or providing a pre-ET service, as well as the prep time for that service. And then anything on top of prepping, arranging, providing, for instance, would be like the phone calls and emails with the employer, the student, or maybe it's a school staff person. All those things can be billed. I think that covers kind of the big buckets of what you would be billing your time for. All right. We are at 12:29, so we have reached the end of our time here today. I have our contact information, Kim, myself, and Ann at the end of this presentation, so please reach out to us. I'm thinking that we can put up some Q&As or some other resources. So be watching our website for that information. We'll be announcing other things as they become available as well. So thanks to all of you out there for participating today, for hanging in there during this really difficult time, both in providing pre-ETs and especially with the pandemic. I hope you all stay healthy and we'll get through all this together. Thank you. Take care.